stays in Russia. And as we have all heard, he claims to have more secrets to potentially leak. How will President Obama's relationship with Vladimir Putin change?
I think that so far what President Putin has said has been pretty sensible. That he does not approve of those who publicly violate their security clearances, and so I don't know. But President Putin so far has seemed to not be trying to use this issue in order to do something anti-American.
Okay, so far that is what he said. We'll see if he changes his mind. Meantime, speaking of some of these leaks, on Capitol Hill yesterday, things got testy. There were lawmakers who were grilling intelligence officials on the NSA surveillance programs. Listen to this.
I think a program of this magnitude, gathering information involving a large number of people involved with telephone companies and so on, could be indefinitely kept secret from the American people?
Well, we tried.
I understand.
So there's laughter, but Mr. Blair, I want to pose the same question to you. Do you think that the government really thought that this massive collection of phone records could be, to use his word, indefinitely kept secret from the American people?
I think you need to go a little bit further back, Brooke, as to what is the job that the intelligence community has been given, and that is to try to detect threats to Americans of the kind that we saw at 9/11, and which we see many other examples of, and try to identify those foreigners or misguided Americans who want to kill a lot of people, cause a lot of damage. That's got to be done within the constraints of our democratic tradition, which means it's got to be done under a law that is passed by the Congress, supervised by courts, and that's basically what the intelligence community has been doing. And so I would.
Does that include monitoring Americans?
When a court, when we can convince a judge that there is probable cause that an American poses a threat, is about to commit a crime that would hurt a lot of people, then the intelligence community can monitor that person's overseas activities, and within the United States, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies can also get permission to observe that person closely, including monitoring their communications. And those are the principles under which we operate, which are no different from the principles that law enforcement and intelligence agencies use for all of their other missions.
We heard from President Obama a number of weeks ago. He was mentioning this when this whole story broke, and he said that, listen, it is a good thing to have a debate about our own personal privacy. If you stand by how this could be a good thing in terms of monitoring and I presume capturing, terrorists, if in fact we need to take these steps and go to the court and get the necessary warrants. But had it not been for Edward Snowden, would we even be having this debate?
I think we would have been eventually, and I've long been an advocate of talking
how would we,
publicly
if we
and openly.
Forgive me for interrupting, but how would we have this debate if Americans had no idea this was going on?
Well, I think the way you do it is with the leadership of the elected representatives, both in the executive and in the congressional branches, and we should be talking about it. And I would take I would say that we, the administration that I was a part of a few years ago, and members of Congress, should be talking about the principles of what we are doing. Now, you have to draw a line at specific operational details, which can give assistance to enemies and to threats, but I think you can talk about things like collecting the information that is available in the business records of companies, so that if you have a suspicious phone number, you can find out who else that number has been talking to. And I think we should talk publicly about those things.
I want to pivot as the former director of national intelligence. I have to ask about drones. We all know the name Anwar al-Awlaki, an American terrorist. As you know, the drone strike that killed him also killed civilians, also killed his 16-year-old son. Today, if you flipped open the New York Times in the op-ed section, this boy's grandfather, Nasser al-Awlaki, pinned this op-ed. He's very upset, and he says that his grandson was killed unlawfully. This is what he writes in part. Nearly 2 years later, I still have no answers. The United States government has refused to explain why Abdul Rahman, this was a 16-year-old, was killed. My grandson was killed by his own government. The Obama administration must answer for its actions and be held accountable. Mr. Blair, how should the administration explain these civilian deaths? I know it's known as collateral damage. How should the administration explain that by drones?
Well, I think you have to place collateral damage in context, Brooke, with other types of weapons that have been used. Number one, I think you have to be very clear that there's a huge difference between this and between the indiscriminate and purposeful killing of as many innocent people as you can, which is what the groups that are threatening us do. For instance, Anwar al-Awlaki himself was the one who gave a bomb to a young Nigerian named Abdul Muttalib, told him, get on an American airplane with as many people on it as you can, and as soon as you are over American airspace, pull this trigger and bring the plane down and kill as many of them as possible. So
I'm not arguing whether it's right or wrong that we took out this terrorist, Anwar al-Awlaki. I'm simply asking about the innocent lives, like the 16-year-old. How does the administration explain that to America, to his grandfather?
I think you explain to him that we try every way we can to minimize damages. They are unavoidable in this kind of a situation, and it's tragic that your grandson was killed, because obviously he had nothing to do with the acts that his father committed. But the strike against Anwar al-Awlaki was justified, and it's unfortunate that he had his son with him at that time.
I appreciate your time so much, sir. Former National Intelligence Director under President Obama, Dennis Blair. Thank you.